Hi guys, I'm just another guy named James, and today I'm going to be talking about the next set of G.I. Joe comics. Now, as you can see, this is maybe a little bit of a shorter set of G.I. Joe comics. It's only 2 issues, and in reality it's actually only 1.5 issues. But they're a substantial enough story that they definitely do just sort of stand on their own. So yeah, that's what we'll be talking about today. But yeah, these issues, like every other issue of G.I. Joe, almost, were written by Larry Hama, but these issues were each one was drawn by a different person. The first one was penciled by Marshall Rogers, and the second one was penciled by Rod Wiggum. Now, neither one of these artists is awful, but I really don't like some of the weird artistic choices that Marshall Rogers makes throughout his issue. There's just some weird angles that don't quite work out in that art, but overall it's not bad. You can tell what's going on in all the panels. But yeah, so this story is a very, very, very direct follow-up to the previous G.I. Joe story, the Cobra Civil War. And I have an entire video on that on my channel. It'll be linked down in the description. But if you don't want to go back and watch the entire video, I'll give you a brief summary of the Cobra Civil War. So basically, Cobra Commander and Serpentor had both been kind of vying for control of Cobra. Eventually that broke out into a hot war, and Serpentor went to the U.S. government. Serpentor, who had recently stolen a bunch of junk, a bunch of trade secrets and stuff from the U.S. government, basically got the coerced the G.I. Joe team, coerced the U.S. government into sending the G.I. Joe team to help Serpentor's group of Cobra. And meanwhile, Destro came in and basically just swept throughout the island. But overall, basically what happened is Serpentor got aided by the G.I. Joe team after coercing the U.S. government into sending him help. Now that was, the G.I. Joe team was ordered to help Serpentor on Cobra Island in that last story. Let's see. But yeah, I mean, overall, this is just it's an interesting little story, because it's one of the few G.I. Joe stories that I think could have stood to be a little bit longer instead of being a little bit shorter. And I'll explain more what I mean by that once I get to the end of the video. But for now, I'm just going to hop straight into our story, which begins with Roadblock and General Hawk going to the Pentagon to try to figure out why the G.I. Joe team was fed to the wolves during the Cobra Island affair. But when Hawk and Roadblock make it to the chamber where the Jugglers are a previously introduced group of generals that has kind of an indirect shadow tie over the Joes. So they're kind of this shadow cabal that sort of controls the Joes. And once Hawk gets in front of them, he demands answers, but the Jugglers just kind of shut him down, and they order him to take responsibility for the Cobra Island affair, even though Hawk was acting under their orders. So Hawk refuses. Then military police come and arrest Hawk, Roadblock, and General Hollingsworth. And they bring them into a car outside of the Pentagon and walk them through. They even walk them through a crowd of reporters, kind of like they were war criminals. The car then begins to drive the Joes to a mental institution run by a federal agency, and Hawk and Hollingsworth begin to discuss how the rest of the Joes are going to be rounded up and arrested, and how they need somebody on the outside. And once Roadblock gets their word that they'll make things right for him after the dust settles, he breaks out of the car and he starts to fight some of the military police, and he even steals one of their bikes before he drives away with military police chasing after him. But he is eventually able to lose them in the streets of Washington, D.C. We then cut to Destro and the Baroness, who have separated themselves from Cobra after Destro kind of basically just walked through Cobra's defenses during the Cobra Island thing. And they're watching the newscast of Hawk's arrest and Roadblock's escape, and they see it as an opportunity. An opportunity for what we won't see until later. And later that night, after all the Joes have been arrested off of the USS Flag, Roadblock comes to Dr. Burkhart's door to ask her for help. Now you may be wondering, James, who is Dr. Burkhart? Dr. Burkhart is kind of this political rights, civil rights, anti-military activist who had been a previously established character throughout the G.I. Joe comic. In the first issue of the G.I. Joe comic, she was the political activist that the Joes were sent to protect from Cobra. And she then later showed up again in issue 39 during the prelude to the raising of Cobra Island. I do have a video on that second one on the channel. Again, it'll be linked down in the description. But yeah, Dr. Burkhart's kind of this like political activist who the Joes have had all these previous encounters with. And in general, she hates the military, but she kind of respects the Joes. And that's because they do good work and they've saved her life a couple of times. But yeah, we then jump to a period a little bit of ahead in time, probably a day or two, and we see Storm Shadow, Jinx, and Billy get surrounded and arrested by a group of feds. But as the ninja are being marched out, Rock and Roll pulls up in a yellow car with some red flames painted on it and tells the ninja to hop in. So they bust in. So they bust out, they, take down the feds, and they get in the car. And they drive off with a pretty substantial amount of government agents chasing after them, but Rock and Roll dips into a car wash and washes off all of the paint, leaving the car just military green with a star on it, so military vehicle. In Virginia, right across the Potomac, we see that Hawk and Hollingsworth are being held, and we see that the main general of the Jugglers, Malthus, is telling his senator how there's nothing tracing the Cobra Island mission back to General Malthus or the senator, since Malthus ordered all of their supplies from an external, unusual source. So it wasn't like wasn't a military supplies budget that they would normally use. So it's kind of hidden. So the Joes they're basically just saying that the Joes are going to go down for the mess. We then cut to Destro and Baroness, who are en route to Washington. And Baroness wants to know why Destro is getting involved. So he explains to her that General Malthus irks him to no end, but the main reason is that he just has a deep respect for General Hawk. We then cut back to Dr. Burkhart's, where we see Rock and Roll pull up with the ninja, and most of the crew assembled is meeting there to discuss their plan. And we also see that Grunt has come back to help, since Grunt had recently gone off to college and kind of had been unenlisted as a soldier. But Roadblock sent out a coded message to all the Joes telling them to meet at Burkhart's. The Joes then discuss their plan in depth. Using some info obtained by Jinx, they figure out where Hawk and Hollingsworth are being held. So Roadblock explains that the Joes are going to go in carrying heavy weapons, and they're going to go in knowing that they may need to use force, but they're going to try not to. If they can fire everything, if they can clear their names without firing a shot, that will be better for everyone. So yeah, they're trying to talk to the media for the most part, because the media will kind of just be like, oh, cover up media, they'll do stuff potentially. So yeah, the Joes then all hop into a convoy, with most of the crew being in the back of a box truck, and they are all disguised as hospital staff. Back at the hospital, we see that everyone in the hospital, except for a news crew, are all working for the government, and Hawk realizes that the Joes are being set up. But the guy who's in their cell guarding them just starts beating up on him once Hawk puts it all together. Once the Joes get to the hospital, the ninja knock out some guards, and they sneak in to try to find Malthus. And the rest of the Joes just march straight in through the front door with Burkhart, who is protesting to the camera crew about the civil liberties of Hawk and Hollingsworth being compromised. We then see that one of the government agents is really getting a little antsy, so he opens fire on the Joes, hitting CoverGirl pretty bad and tagging Bazooka. But Dr. Burkhart continues her protest through a hail of bullets. Hawk and Hollingsworth take the chaos opportunity to knock out their guards and steal their guns. And upstairs we see Roadblock get Dr. Burkhart into cover, and the rest of the team pop up and lay down some covering fire. And as all that's happening, Malthus is making a run to Hawk and Hollingsworth's cell to kill them, because if you can't get them to go down for it, he just wants to kill them, I guess. And Hawk and Hollingsworth are forted up in their cell. They're using beds for cover, but Malthus just chucks a grenade in there and blows them up, and tries to blow them up, but Hawks and Hollingsworth get under the mattress. And just at that moment, Destro takes his opportunity, busts down the prison wall, and he comes in and talks to General Malthus, and he just hands General Malthus a copy of his receipt for all the ammunition and weapons that were used on Cobra Island. And that's it. That's where the story ends. And it's a really... It just ends right there. Literally just ends with Destro... I mean, I showed you the last panel. It's Destro holding the receipt. It's really weird, right? It feels... It's such an unsatisfying conclusion. Because you have upstairs, you have the Joes and Dr. Burkhart, like, kind of fighting their way through this hospital. It should have been a really, really cool story. And parts of it are really cool. I like that you get, for the most part, it's just a story about some of the older Joe characters. And that's something that had been missing for a good while in the comic. You've been just getting so many of these stories where they introduce so many new Joes, and you forget about them almost immediately because they don't mean anything and they don't matter. So it is kind of refreshing in that sense to see like CoverGirl and Bazooka and Zap and not Deep Six and Wetsuit, and just a bunch of the kind of older Joes who sort of weirdly never really did much of anything. So it's kind of cool to see all of those characters in this story doing things. But overall, it's really Roadblock's story, which is kind of weird. Because Hawk just kind of brings Roadblock with him to the Pentagon at the beginning for no real reason. It's just an odd choice. It really just is. And this is definitely my personal bias is coming in, because from a storytelling perspective, it should have been Duke that Hawk brought to the Pentagon with him. Since they establish many times throughout the comic that Duke is acting commander, field commander of the Joe team. He's kind of your second in command to Hawk. Even though, like, technically by ranking, that's not how that works. Although Duke does still rank above Roadblock in military ranking. It would have made more sense, based off of what they had established in previous stories, to have it be Duke instead of Roadblock. Or, even better, have it be both of them. Because that's a concept that they established in the first appearance of Duke and Roadblock. They're kind of like buddies, this inseparable team of two. And they keep going with that for a while, but eventually it just kind of goes away. And that is kind of a shame. But because I always thought that was a cool concept. Mostly because I like both of the characters. I like Duke, I like Roadblock, so I was like, yeah, just put them together. It makes sense. It's cool. But yeah, overall, I do just stand by that what I said at the beginning, the story's too short. It should have gone into a third issue. And I understand that this story is really more so a wrap up to the Cobra Island stuff than anything else. But it would have been cool if we got another issue, man. Just like, having Hawk and Hollingsworth breaking out of their prison under like floors beneath everybody else, seeing the Joes actually have to fight their way through the hospital or something like that. As it stands, the story just ends so abruptly. It ended so abruptly that I've read all these stories before. When I was reading it again to make this video, I was shocked that this story didn't continue into the next issue at all. And it doesn't, not even a little bit. The next story is this weird little romp with the Dreadnoks. It's not a favorite, this next story that we're coming up on. But yeah, overall, this story is just weird. You know, it's a great General Hawk story at the end of the day. Because Hawk's refusing to take the blame for something he didn't do. He is standing on his principles, and he's also just just pretty darn cool in it, you know what I mean? Like, you know, he's in the prison, he breaks out of the prison, he jumps his cuffs, he's doing all this cool, like, kind of a cool military stuff throughout the story, this kind of cool, like, more secret agent-y stuff, actually. Hawk kind of turns into James Bond for a little bit in the waning parts of the story, but it's cool. It works well for Hawk's character, and overall, I do enjoy the story. But yeah, it's Destro kind of just comes in, shows his receipts, and that's the end. And I get how it would be the end, but given that so many Joe stories kind of have a little bit of extra tag on after the action ends, having this end in the middle of the battle at the end of the issue is so weird. Overall, it's not my favorite story, but as you're reading it, it's pretty cool. Like, you know, when the biggest complaint about a story is that you just wanted more and it's not there, it's not necessarily the worst thing ever. But yeah, overall on the art front, Marshall Rogers' art is just a little stiff to me. It's a little stiff, he uses weird angles, and he uses weird character designs. Like in a Marshall Rogers drawing of most of these characters, honestly, they don't look the way that anyone else draws them, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But given that I don't like the way he draws them, I think it is a bad thing. And then you have Rod Wiggum. And Rod Wiggum, man, I don't know. Something about the art in that second issue, I just dig it, man. Like, it's just cool. Like, especially the way Roadblock's drawn, you know, it's like massive. He's just massive in that issue. And I dig the way he draws Roadblock and Hawk. Especially the way he draws Hawk, actually. Because, yeah, he gets the size right on Roadblock, but he gets everything else right on Hawk. But yeah, overall, I do generally think that these issues are pretty good. If you have the Cobra Civil War, obviously I would say they're worth picking up. But yeah, and that's really all I've got today. It's a shorter set of issues, but not so short that I could have tagged it in with the Cobra Civil War. But yeah, overall, I do think this is a good story. Not great, but good. Yeah, I mean, overall, that's all I got for you today. So I'm just another guy named James. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.